Hey everyone, my name is Tanzir. I am a learning coach. What I do is I train teams, students, and professionals how to get better at learning. I've been training and working with Dr. Justin Sung, the leading expert in practical learning science, for almost the last 5 years. And I've also taught these learning skills to learners, professionals, students from multiple domains and multiple countries all around the world. In this video, we're going to do a guided consultation. So it's going to be as if you and I are having a conversation about some of the learning challenges that you're facing specific to your learning needs. And hopefully I'm able to read your mind and also give you some general pointers and principles that I would basically give anyone who is looking to improve their learning skills. So this could be in the context for learning for an exam. You could be a professional, you could be a doctor studying for specialist exams, you could be a entrepreneur who's trying to start their first business or scale their current business. You could be a student in high school. Wherever your learning background is, everything that we're about to talk about in this video is how your brain likes to work and learn. So if you have a brain, which hopefully everyone watching this video does, even though I'm sure you probably know some people in your life that don't have a brain. We're definitely going to try teaching you some of those skills today, and I'm going to ask you some back and forth questions to help you navigate your actual progress as well. So you won't have to worry about pausing the video either, because it's going to be quite interactive. I'm going to give you some time to also take the time to write down some of the notes, and the timer will be on the screen. So you don't have to pause this video at any time. You can just keep the video going and you can be in flow and answer some of these questions. Okay, so let's start off with the first question, which is, what is your learning goal? Just broadly think about it. For some of you, it's already really clear. You've got end of year exams. You've got an exam you just have to pass. Maybe you're trying to get a 90% average WAM. Maybe you want to get a 4.0 GPA. Some of you 7.0. There's different scales all around the world. Just generally try identifying your learning goal. Obviously in an academic setting, which is more structured, it's a lot easier to know what that is. If you are a professional and you're working in what we call unstructured learning environments, you're learning for a business, you're learning on the job, you're learning a certain skill, you still want to try identifying what that is. So I'll just give you 30 seconds to quickly think about it. Just really, really quickly, just, think about generally the direction that you want to go in. My suggestion is think about where you'll be in the next 3 months. So don't think too far. You can generally think about in the next 3 months as a rough guideline. But if you've got like an end of year exam, it could just be like in the next 3 months, I want to be better prepared for that end of year exam. So I'm going to start a timer for 30 seconds starting now. So again, it's more medium term, nothing too far in the future, like 5 years from now, but nothing too soon, like tomorrow, because it's not going to be enough time for us to make any meaningful improvements. Just a few more seconds. There we go. And for some of you, potentially you're not even thinking about it just because you kind of already know what your learning goal is, which is fine, right? Okay, cool. Now, when you're able to do that, now what I want you to do is, again, it doesn't matter what the goal is. It doesn't matter if it's 12 months, 9 months, 6 months, like just generally you kind of know what your goal is now. Now what I want to ask you is, what do you think is holding you back from achieving that goal? I want you to make a list of barriers that you think that exists for yourself right now that's not going to help you achieve that goal. I'll tell you why I'm asking you this question, and then we can set another timer for 2 minutes just to learn more about why I asked this question and the importance of being able to ask this question. So what we're doing right now, like through this question that I've asked you, and the first question that I asked you as well, you self-reflected, right? You just took the time you're going to take the time to think about some of your own barriers and some of your own problems. What I tend to see happens with a lot of the students I work with and professionals alike, and this is just generally how education is structured. When it comes to student, teacher, or coachee, or trainee, trainer relationships, what tends to happen is that the student would ask a question and the teacher would then give a response. And that is useful. Obviously, you want to use expertise and external calibration to gain more knowledge. But the problem with this, especially for something like learning skills, at the end of the day, you don't want your progress to be contingent on someone else who is guiding your process. You want to be able to push that progress as much as you can possibly do by yourself. And this is increasingly more important for something like learning skills, because unfortunately, I can't put a camera into your brain and I don't actually know how you're performing these skills. It's a cognitive skill. It happens in the mind. There are some things that I could try doing that would help me understand how well you are learning. But at the end of the day, if we can make the progress contingent upon ourselves, and if we can self-reflect and start thinking about some of these issues for ourselves, this is actually a lot more useful. Generally, yes, most learners will experience similar problems, but the specificity of problems is just going to drastically change, right? If you've got a family and you're a parent, you've already got tons of issues that people that don't have children have, but then you have to consider that as part of your schedule, etc. So we're just going to set a timer for 2 minutes again. And what I want you to do is I want you to prioritize the quantity of barriers that you make a list of. Not quality, just quantity. So be really quick with it. I'll give you a few examples and then we can start this timer. An example might be, well, it takes me too long to study, right? Anytime it comes to exam time, I don't even know how to study. Like, there's just so much content. Maybe you're really overwhelmed. Maybe there's a bit of procrastination involved. Just think about those. Prioritize quantity, not quality. Try making a numbered list. And we're going to do those in the next 2 minutes, starting now. And it's okay if some of the problems are relatively similar, just go for quantity. All right, okay, let's wrap that up. So what we just did there for 2 minutes is we just quickly made a list, a numbered list of the barriers that we have. And by the end of it, maybe you've got 2 things, maybe you only have 3 things. Maybe some of you who are a bit more reflective, you've got 10 things, 15 things, however much you have. At least what we've done here is we've tried identifying some independent individual barriers that are somewhat related for sure at the end of the day. But again, we're prioritizing quantity here. We're not necessarily focusing on fleshing it out. So I'll give you a few examples of what your lists might look like. Here I've said time is one of the big things. Family and taking care of my family responsibilities is something that's getting in the way of me being able to study for my exams, for example. Maybe stress and overwhelm, that's what I feel. I'll just go for one more for this example list. And a bit of uncertainty. I'm entering a new year of my studies and I'm feeling a bit uncertain as to whether or not I can potentially perform right now that the assessments are a lot more difficult and the exams are a lot more difficult. So this is an example of what one list might look like. Another list might look like, maybe you've got kids, right? They're definitely having to take care of your children. Hopefully that's a priority for you. So you've listed that as something that gets in the way of being able to achieve your learning goals. Maybe you've got work, right? You've got to work and there's lots of stress from work. Some of you might have procrastination on this list. Some of you might have mindset, fear of failure. Your lists are going to look very different, but that's okay. You can just work with the numbered list that you have right now. And here's the next activity. We're going to do this in 30 seconds. So we need to be really quick with this one. Just based on gut feel, we've got this numbered list. Circle the biggest barrier. The biggest barrier that you think is holding you back from achieving that learning goal. 30 seconds. Don't think about it too quick. Don't think about it too long. I'm going to start that timer for now. Starting now. Again, we can just do this on gut feel. It's all good. Just a few more seconds. All right, we'll wrap up now. Okay, so as you can see, what we've just done there, really quickly, now we've got two things. We've got we've got three things now. We've got our learning goal that we're thinking about. We've also got a list of our barriers that we think is holding us back from achieving this learning goal that we have. And now from this list, there is one of them that is circled. We should only be circling one, right? And now what we want to do is we want to explore this a little bit. So I'm going to give you a few examples of what other people's lists might look like based on my experience working with professionals and students alike from different backgrounds. So for example, in my list, I have circled stress and the belief that I can do it as one of the biggest barriers. Maybe the content is not that hard. There isn't a lot of content, but anytime I try sitting down and studying, I just get really stressed. That might be the biggest barrier that I have personally identified just based on gut feel. It's okay. We can feel, just kind of embrace that gut feel. Okay. For some of us, it might be we procrastinate a lot. Some of us, it might be, I keep forgetting my notes. Like I write notes, but it just takes too long to take notes. Maybe there's lots of lectures. You've circled one. You've already prioritized one. Okay. What we need to do now is we need to spend time understanding why we circled this. I'm going to give you some context and then I'll give you, again, just a minute to think about the reason why we circled this. So what happens is already we've got three things. We've got the goal, we've got the barriers preventing us from achieving this goal, and then we've hypothesized what the biggest barrier could be. This is really powerful because you're probably amongst the very few people in the world who have actualized these thoughts on paper. You've written them down and you've made them conscious. Again, it's your best guess. It might not be accurate, but at least you're trying to actually identify what those barriers are. Because for many of the learners that I work with, unfortunately, a lot of these issues, they know that they have issues, but it's in the subconscious mind. And because it's there and they haven't actualized it onto paper or they haven't thought about it, it's really hard to actually identify how to specifically target that issue and how to work on that issue and identify the issues in relation to one another, because not all barriers are the same. Not all issues are the same. We need to have a systematic approach to prioritizing certain barriers because, again, at the end of the day, you might have a list of barriers, but you're not going to be able to tackle all of them. So it is about prioritizing them. And what we're doing now in this next step is we are trying to identify why we prioritize this barrier. That gut feeling that we had, we want to lean into it a little bit more and explore the reasons why we have that. So an example here is some people, they might circle stress as one of their biggest barriers. And the evidence for that is that maybe last night they tried studying, but they just got so overwhelmed. They really tried, but they just couldn't sit down and study. And so they ended up procrastinating. They ended up watching videos online and not getting their work done. So, procrastination is an issue and a barrier, but that stress is one of the big ones. Maybe they believe they can't do it. Right now, they've entered like a competitive program, or they're their friends are really smart, so they just have this fixed mindset. They can't move forward. That might be the evidence. For some people that might have circled, it takes too long to study. For you, it might have been, oh, well, the exam that I sat last week, I didn't know half the content, right? I just wasn't able to go through all the content, and therefore maybe we failed the exam. That could have been something that happened as well. So what we're doing is that we're going to just spend a minute, just really quickly, trying to think about real experiences that we've had recently or even in the past, and trying to attribute those experiences to why we think this is our biggest barrier from the list that we've identified, right? From this circle that you have, you've got one barrier and you've circled it. I just want to give you all a minute to ponder about it. Again, you don't have to write here anything here necessarily per se, but just think about, why do you think this is the biggest barrier? And maybe if you need to change the barrier, you're more than welcome to change it. So 1 minute starting now. All right, that's 1 minute done. So now we've just tried thinking about the reasons why we might be facing this. What I want you to do now is I want you to find another barrier that could be the true barrier, right? Now that we've thought about it a little bit more, maybe there's another barrier. So for example, as I was thinking about that, I circled stress as my biggest barrier, but now that I was thinking about a little bit the evidence, it made me realize, procrastination might be the biggest issue, actually, one of the big barriers. So what we're doing is we're deliberately challenging ourselves to think about another plausible hypothesis or another alternative barrier that could actually end up being the bigger barrier. So again, in this next minute, just try forcing yourself to find another barrier or circle another one on your list, and try seeing whether or not there is another reason why your learning goals might not be something that you're achieving. Again, the reason this is important is we don't want to fall into a confirmation bias where we're starting to think that this is one of our barriers, but in reality, it may not actually be one of your barriers. It might be another thing that we didn't even think about. It's only once we're prompted on it. Again, we're taking our best guess here. So I'm going to start a timer of 1 minute. Try thinking about another barrier. All right, just a few more seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, let's end it there. All right, so if you're able to find another barrier, that's great. If you weren't able to, that's okay. You might have felt that process was a bit hard because we really had to just challenge the way that we're thinking about the information and thinking about some of the barriers that we had. But now, I promise you can listen on now. I'm going to get into more depth about teaching you some concepts. So congratulations. By the way, good job. You've been able to, if you've made it this far into the video so far. If you're still feeling confused, that's okay. Again, these skills are really hard. So, I mean, you're already doing yourself a service by sitting through it and guiding yourself and trying to learn more about it. So by now, you've been able to identify your general learning goal, like you kind of know which direction you want to go in. You've been able to identify some barriers that you have that are preventing you from achieving that learning goal. We've been able to prioritize one of those barriers. We've circled one. We thought about some of the evidence as to why we think that's the biggest barrier. And then, if it was possible, we tried thinking about an alternative hypothesis. So again, we don't want to frame ourselves too soon. For example, we really like thinking that our time management is a problem, but in reality, it might be our mindset. It might be our procrastination. It might be our note-taking skills. So again, what we're doing is that we are critically thinking and we're pulling ourselves from one frame of thinking and trying to take a look at problems from another frame. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I want you to keep those problems in mind. Now you've got two things. You've got that circled problem, your main problem, and then we've also got the alternative, the second closest reason why we feel like we're not achieving the goals. I'm going to go through 5 dimensions that you need in order to become an effective learner. And these 5 dimensions have been derived from the experience that myself and Dr. Justin Sung have with almost thousands of learners around the world. After listening to thousands of people talk about their issues and barriers to learning, we found that there are 5 broad dimensions that you can categorize them into. And being able to learn these dimensions is very useful. 3 of them people tend to neglect. 2 of them people tend to always think about. So let's quickly go through them. The first one is what we call deep processing. This is what happens in your brain. This is when you're taking notes and you're trying to think about the information. You're trying to remember the information and make sure that you increase your mastery in the information. This means being able to answer harder exam questions and becoming smarter. Most people are thinking about this. They're trying to study more. They're trying to take more notes. They're trying to make better notes, etc. But we'll talk more about this later on. The second one is retrieval. This means once the information is in our brains, how are we trying to test ourselves, recall the information, find our gaps? This is doing practice questions, practice exams, trying to teach an imaginary student the content that you've learned, trying to make a presentation on it. If you're a professional, this means maybe you read a book on the weekend and you tried telling a junior more about the book. Maybe you did a presentation on the concepts to your bosses and you tried making a business change. So you can see there are just those 2 dimensions here so far, deep processing and retrieval, and these very much relate to the study process. This is why it's quite easy for people to identify and just work on these 2, because it's the most obvious things that we do that we think leads to learning. But there are 3 more that we still need to consider. The third one here is going to be mindset. Mindset is really important because the way that you believe and see yourself, your sense of self, actually really gets in the way of your ability to learn these skills and get better in the first place. If there is someone that believes that intelligence is fixed, they can't become smarter, they cannot achieve their goals, they're probably not going to achieve their goals. That's because their own sense of belief, they don't even believe in themselves, let alone maybe others could believe in them, but if they don't believe in themselves, they just won't be able to make it through. So that's the third aspect that people aren't thinking about. This also does relate to stress management, mental health. These are all important factors that do very much influence your learning process and could be one of those barriers. The fourth one here is self-management. This refers to time management, task management. If you're procrastinating, this is what it relates to. And this is the skill of being able to change your behaviors to align with the behaviors that you need in order to achieve your goals, and also manage your environment so you reduce the amount of distractions that you have. The fifth dimension is self-regulation. This refers to your reflective ability, your ability to set goals, your ability to adjust those goals and monitor the progress that you're making on those goals and make sure that you continuously improve. So everything that we've done throughout this video together is a form of self-regulation. So if you've never done something like this before, or if it's not as systematic for you, it also suggests that self-regulation could also be a barrier. Potentially, if you reflected more and you were just a bit more proactive about some of the mistakes you were making, maybe that could actually be enough for you to become aware about your problems in the first place and work on chipping away at solutions. So again, there are 5 dimensions. We're going to repeat that, and then you want to link one of those dimensions to the issues that you've circled. First one is deep processing. If you're forgetting notes, if it takes too long to learn, if you're not able to achieve a certain level of mastery, if there is a friend that you have who's studying less than you and he's achieving a better result, or they're able to present a better presentation, or her business is doing better than yours, then it suggests that there's something happening in the brain, there's something happening in their brains that's not happening in our brains, that suggests that they're able to learn the information better. And that's because they have deep processing skills. If we are forgetting the information too much, if learning feels boring, if it feels like a chore, it suggests that we have more shallow processing, more passive learning. The second dimension there was retrieval practice. So this is about doing practice questions, making sure that we're recalling the information, applying different ways of thinking about the information. The third dimension was mindset. This is our belief. This is our sense of self. This is how in control we think we are of our goals and what we believe and who we perceive ourselves to be. The fourth dimension was self-management. This is our ability to create plans and follow through with them, manage our time, manage our schedule. If we're procrastinating constantly, it's definitely a self-management issue. And finally, it was our self-regulation. This is our ability to reflect deeply and think about the issues that we're facing, think about solutions, and being quite recursive there. Those are the 5 dimensions. I just really quickly want to give you some time, maybe just 30 seconds, just to think about, out of the barrier that you've selected, so your alternative barrier and also the barrier that you've circled, right? So there's 2 barriers. Maybe some of you only have 1 barrier. Which dimension does it closely align with the most? So there's 5 dimensions. I'm going to recall them again. Deep processing, retrieval, mindset, self-management, and self-regulation. Which one does your barrier relate to? Let's start a timer of 30 seconds now. All right, just a few more seconds to get this sorted. Okay, there we go, sorted. So now, what do we have? We've got a general understanding of our learning goal, whether we've written them down or not. We've also got a list of barriers, a numbered list of some barriers that we think are holding us back. We thought about some evidence as to which one we think the most biggest barrier. So we've got a circled barrier. We've got an alternative hypothesis for what another barrier could be, something that doesn't come immediately to our mind. And now we've also got a dimension mapped to this barrier that we have identified, this prioritized barrier, and also the alternative barrier. So I'll give you an example of what this is. So for me, I circled stress to be the biggest barrier. So I feel like that is going to relate to the mindset dimension, okay? Now what this means now is that, okay, my alternative barrier is procrastination. So that's more of a self-management issue. So what we've done now, by this time of the video, some of you might just be following along. Generally, that's okay. But if you've been following through, you have a general understanding now, and also a pretty strong grasp of the dimension of where your problems actually lie. Now, maybe before starting this video, some of you might not have been as aware. And when I do consults, this is actually a very common experience. Some of you might not have been aware of those barriers, but now, by just asking yourself these prompts and giving yourself even just a little bit of time to think about certain things, what we're doing is that we are starting to identify and hypothesize where barriers are, but we're also learning more about these barriers and learning more about the nature of the barriers that we're facing. So now, by the end, this is what I have. I'm going to give some examples of what you all might have. I've got stressed being a mindset-related barrier, and then I've got procrastination being a self-management related barrier. So you can see by the end, now I've got one of those 5 dimensions, and I've identified where my problem is. So what I'll do now is I'll quickly talk about an activity that you can do that will be quite useful for you to do. And we will then wrap up the video with some actionables and some next steps that you can take. So now that we know the dimension that we have a barrier in, I want to give you just 1 minute. I just want you to quickly, just take your best guess. What do you think your next step is? Now that we've got a prioritized dimension and we've got like a barrier that's associated with it, I just want you to think about your next steps. So for example, for me, something that I've identified is that stress is one of my biggest barriers. So I think something there that I need to do is I need to develop more awareness about my stress. I need to identify how I respond to stress and the specific stressors that I have in my environment. I think that's actually a very good experiment that I could do. I need to get some more awareness. But then for my alternative barrier, I've got procrastination here. I'm thinking for procrastination, I need to make that a bit more specific. I think my phone is what I procrastinate on a lot. So one of the changes that I think I'll make here is I'll try downloading an app blocker that's going to help me get a bit better at self-management. That's like a change that we might make. So again, I'm going to give you all just 1 minute to think about a change that you can make. And then I'll talk more about specifically some of the changes that have been very useful for my learners to make in each of the 5 dimensions, starting now. So again, no cheating. Try thinking about a solution for yourself. Don't go into Google. If you had to give someone else this feedback, if someone else was struggling with this dimension that you've identified and the specific barrier, what would you say to them? All right, so that timer is done. Okay, let's recap everything that we've done so far, and let's end the video off in a little bit with some clear next steps for you as well. So what we've done is that we've identified the main goal that we have, the learning goal. We're able to identify some barriers associated with that goal. We then prioritize those barriers based on some quick evidence and some gut feel. We then tried thinking about an alternative barrier because we don't want to fall into a confirmation bias and we don't want to fall in love with what we think the problem is and what we think the solution is. We don't want to do that. And then what we did was that we associated the prioritized barrier and one of the alternative barriers with a dimension of learning. So that was mindset. I'll do it in the order that I did it. Deep processing, retrieval, mindset, self-management, and self-regulation. And then what we did finally is we tried creating a quick change from ourselves, just generating a quick change that we think we can do in order to improve. Super, super quick. Doesn't have to be anything specific. Now comes the really hard part. So this is going to be basically the never-ending game of learning more about your process and trying to kind of make forth. So now that you've got this change that you've identified, there's one last thing that we need to do. We need to learn more about the dimension that we've identified that we are the weakest in. So again, the example that I give here is I was weakest in mindset. That was something that I was quite weak in. But what we want to do now is we want to learn more about that dimension and we want to learn more about our barrier. This is actually the first step that I recommend most of my learners. So for example, if we are stressed or if you procrastinate, we actually need to realize why we procrastinate first. If we don't realize the sources of procrastination, it's not good enough to say we procrastinate. We want to be able to identify and specify specifically what is it that's causing that procrastination. Is it our phone? Is it our TV? Is it our Xbox? Is it specifically having access to the internet? That was a very big reason why I procrastinated. So you can see I was being quite granular there. For me, another reason I procrastinated was because when I'm home, I tend to see like, okay, this is definitely way overboard. I tend to see like hair on the floor and I feel the need to clean. And I actually had one doctor that I was working with who noticed that anytime she was studying from home and it was messy, she would go get her vacuum and she would like clean up the floor. And so what she did was that she bought like a robot vacuum. So she never has to think about it. Again, that's like a really bizarre thing. And most people don't have to think about that yet because most people are busy procrastinating on their phones, etc. Right? Okay, so what I'll do now is I'll explain some of the next steps that we suggest learners to take for each of the 5 dimensions. So this video is holistic. I'll just give you a few examples and stories to kind of drive it in. So if you have a deep processing issue, this means, and most people do at the early parts of their learning journey, because a lot of traditional note-taking methods and learning methods fail to allow most learners to meet their learning needs. This means that you need to learn more about how the process of learning in itself occurs. So again, what you need to do is you actually just need to learn a little bit more about your brain. In this video, we're not going to be able to cover it because it gets really in depth. So if you want, I'm more than happy to make a future video on that. But I recommend learning more about learning in itself. So Dr. Justin Sung does this really well on YouTube. Archer Newton, you can go check these guys out. Benjamin Keep. These are some really some leading voices in learning. And the reason you need to do this is because if you don't fundamentally know how your brain works, we're not going to be able to improve the way that our brain works, right? It's like, just getting someone to make a car faster, but they open up the hood and they're like, dude, I have no idea what I'm looking at. What the hell is this part here? We need to learn more about the engine. We need to learn more about the car. In this situation, we need to learn more about our brain. We need to learn more about the terms of what it means to process information. What is deep processing? What is shallow processing? What is active learning? What is passive learning? And what are some few strategies you can start using in order to learn more information, retain more information, take notes faster, be less overwhelmed with information? So that's your very first step. You just need to learn more about the learning process itself. And this is not about changing the way that you take notes yet, not yet. This is not about increasing your study time by 1 hour. This is not about reading the textbook first and then blurting out the information. Like TikToks, like study gurus, that how they say like you should scribble. It's not about applying any techniques yet. It is genuinely about learning more about how your brain functions and then applying techniques. Because what you're doing is you're not blindly applying techniques anymore. You are applying techniques by being someone who is looking at the evidence, looking at how your brain works, and then applying certain techniques. So again, I'll have more videos on this in the future, so I can't actually recommend any now. But the biggest recommendation I have, go take a look at Dr. Justin Sung, Archer Newton, Benjamin Keep. These are some people that are really good in being able to talk more about how the brain works, and they definitely do it to a depth that most people don't do it. So that's for deep processing. If you identify that to be the biggest dimension and where your biggest barrier is the dimension it belongs in. If retrieval practice is one of your big barriers, if you find yourself not being able to revise content, if you find yourself not being able to recall information, or you find yourself performing poorly on exams, it could suggest a retrieval gap. This means that, unfortunately for retrieval, it's actually quite easy to start integrating it. It probably means that you need to spend less time on taking notes and more time spent. Again, this is super, super generalized. I don't know if it applies to your situation, but if you're not doing any retrieval practice at all, if you're not doing any practice test, if you're not doing any type of like trying to teach a 10-year-old, if you're not doing brain dumps from recall, you should start integrating some retrieval practice into your system. If you're taking notes all the time, but you're never doing practice questions and you're never doing practice exams, number one, yes, get better at deep processing so you can take notes quicker and remember them more, so learn more in less time. But number two, you need to compensate for the fact that you have bad processing, you have shallow processing, you have what we call inefficient encoding, right? You need to be able to use certain testing methods to compensate for that. And retrieval practice, again, there's lots of literature that exists out there, being one of the strongest methods of being able to strengthen your understanding of a topic, your depth, and your ability to use the information in a certain way. That's if it relates to retrieval practice. If your barrier related to the dimension of mindset, very much like deep processing, it is about gaining more awareness around what it is. If it is related to mental health, I cannot recommend getting mental health support enough. I have a story of a learner, just because I'm a learning coach. So I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a certified psychologist. I'm studying through psychology, and maybe in a few years' time, I'll become a psychologist. But as a learning coach, because a lot of the work that I do is with the mind, anytime I'm doing these types of consults with learners, there are both verbal and non-verbal cues that I read. And I have to read them because, again, I'm trying to figure out what the core problem is and what the biggest barrier is that is not helping this learner progress. So one of the actual first things about mindset barriers is, number one, be open-minded about it as well, because a lot of people are quite quick to push away mindset barriers. So if you made your list and you didn't have any mindset barriers, there's two things that are true. Number one, your mindset's already really, really, really good. Or number two, potentially you're not sensitive enough to some of the mindset issues and some of the stressors or mental health related concerns that you might be facing. Anyway, going back to the learner, I actually had a learner I was doing a consultation with, and again, as I said, I'm quite sensitive to verbal and non-verbal cues, and I was picking up on a lot of things that he was saying and a lot of feelings that he was sharing with me. It did align with symptoms of depression, right? And again, I'm not a mental health professional. I cannot give him a formal diagnosis for depression, but I hinted it to him. I'm like, hey, based on what I'm seeing, this is what I see for most learners. When I recommend learners to get mental health support, they are formally diagnosed with depression or anxiety. And my learner was the student I was working with was quite quick to dismiss it. He was like, oh, I don't think I have it. Even though I'm not a mental health professional, but having worked with many learners that have certain mental health barriers and mental disorders, I saw some alignment in some of the symptoms. Unfortunately, he was quite open-minded to get a diagnosis, and it turns out he had major depressive disorder, MDD. And it shocked me because, well, it didn't like shock me, but again, this is starting to kind of allude to the fact that as people, sometimes we might be a little bit of what we call alexithymic. So that's a term for, it basically means emotionally colorblind. So sometimes we may not actually be aware that we're stressed, or we may not be aware that we are depressed or anxious, or we've got like a certain order, and we're like normal. It's okay. It's normal to feel stressed when we're studying. It's normal to constantly feel like I don't get to do my hobbies. It's normal to feel like I am trying to catch up all the time. So there's lots of literature out there. There's lots of experts out there who talk about this. One of the experts coming to my mind is Dr. Gabor Mate. He's got amazing work on this type of stuff that I need to learn more about myself as well. So that's mindset as a barrier. Learn more about mindset, learn more about what these symptoms look like, speak to a mental health professional if need be, take care of yourself from that angle. But it starts off with being open-minded about the fact that it could be an issue. It actually could be, and that's okay. Right, I've recommended therapy to many of my learners who thought that they never needed therapy in their lives, but fortunately, because they took the therapy, they started to see that a lot of these skills were improving a lot more. It's also important for me to mention, before I move on to the last two dimensions, that trying to work on these learning skills whilst you have a mental disorder, whether or not you're conscious or unconscious about it, can be extremely triggering. And the reason that's the case is because a lot of this is, working on the mind. So again, if you find that this happens for many people, again, they're quite blind to the fact that they may have something, or even just negligent, or they're just not aware, and they find it significantly harder to work on these skills compared to other people and other peers that they might have that have relatively moderate levels of mental health. And that is not a problem. There are so many factors that influence it, and life is life. Everything gets in the way. And it's important to be open-minded to that being a factor. So I should also have that as a side kind of note. Okay, let's talk about the last two barriers. So just really quickly, we talk about deep processing, retrieval, mindset. We've got self-management. If procrastination is one of your barriers, or managing your time, managing your tasks, my biggest recommendation to you is to learn more about behavior change principles. A really good book here is Atomic Habits by James Clear. He's got really good stuff on that. Another good model is the ABC framework for behavior change that works really well. And you can take a look at many other ones that are available online, but basically it involves, number one, being aware of what's actually trying to, that makes you procrastinate, these sources of issues. So again, it all starts off with awareness in some way, shape or form, and open-mindedness. And number two, it is about identifying and being quite specific and granular about what those barriers could be. And number three, it's about trying to apply deliberate interventions into your environment, into using a certain tool like a scheduling app, a Notion app, a task management app, trying to be more aware of where your time is going and being recursive with that. Most of the time, some of the changes, so again, I kind of told you to make a change. I kind of made you predict what a change could be. Most of the time, these changes actually will fail. right? But that's okay. We're new to this skill. We're new to this barrier. We're new to this dimension that we're working with. We've never tackled this type of issue before. So it's only natural that sometimes when we try making changes, the initial attempts at trying to make the change is going to fail. But what we're doing is that we're increasing our awareness of what those attempts are, and we're slowly getting there. So again, it's also that mindset reshift that failure is not the opposite of success. It's a stepping stone towards success. Finally, we've got self-regulation, which is the ability to reflect and set goals and reflect on your processes, reflect on your outcomes, deliberately change up your processes. This video that you're doing, this guided consultation, if you made it this far, it's an example of you self-regulating. I'm not doing anything, I'm just prompting you, but you're doing all that hard lifting and you are thinking about your issues, you're thinking about the mistakes that you have, you're regularly reflecting. So for this part here, it's about integrating regular reflective practice into your own learning methods, and finally making sure that you're able to make sure that you are reflecting on what's going well, what's not going well. For the things that are going well, how can we keep them and how can we continue to improve on them? For the things that aren't going as well, how can we take a look at that and how can we kind of move forward? And again, it is that self-reflection component, it's that monitoring component, it's about changing things up, and it's a lot. There's a lot to uncover here. So again, those are the 5 dimensions, and those are the 5 next steps that you can take depending on the barrier that you found and depending where you think your issues are. Okay, so the last question that I ask at my guided consults is, how do you feel? We talked about a lot today, and if you've made it to this part of the video, congratulations. I applaud you, right? Because you've been able to sit down and you've been able to think about some of these thoughts here. You've been able to make this quite personalized to you as well. And hey, maybe by this time you're still feeling lost. That's okay. Maybe you're still feeling like it's not too clear how things are. Maybe you're still feeling like I still need some more help. You're more than welcome to let me know. So please leave a comment down on if there were any parts of the video that you found useful, or if there are any parts that you feel like you needed more elaboration on, and I'm more than happy to create future content around that.